Blog Talk Radio.
Alternative facts.
The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. At 12:07 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, numerous unidentified objects of unknown intent and unknown origin were detected at high altitudes over multiple locations of Earth's outer space by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and these objects are presumed to be some form of controlled aircraft. It is not known if more of these aircraft will arrive, or if they will attempt entering Earth's atmosphere. United States citizens are encouraged to monitor local media outlets, as more updates will follow as information becomes available. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. Attacks by the undead have been reported in several states across the country. The dead are rising from their graves and are attacking the human race. At this time, it's expected that more attacks of this nature will occur in several other states in the next few hours. The intent behind their attack is unknown at this time. He has been observed that a bike or exchange of fluids is a method of transmission. This is an extremely dangerous situation if they crave the taste of human flesh. It is not known whether this event will last for hours, days, or even longer. Stay calm, as authorities have been dispatched to deal with these creatures. An all-clear siren will be sounded when this situation is under control. Pacific Standard Time, nor is detected a long-range nuclear missile launcher. This missile is believed to be headed in the direction of all residents within a 400-mile radius of this area should seek a fallout shelter immediately.
Welcome to Within the Chaos with your host, Rodney the Viking Shortridge. I want to give a big old shout out to the Facebook paranormal groups that allow us to post our shows on their pages and helping us to get the word out about all of our guests. If anyone would like to speak to Black Diamond Paranormal Society, BDPS, to discuss your paranormal questions or issues, go to our website at blackdiamondps.org or email blackdiamondps@yahoo.com. As always, our services are free.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. You can listen in by calling 516-387-1922, or you can go to the Vibe Radio Network website at blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. For deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for listening to Within the Chaos. My name is Rodney Shortridge, and I'll be your host tonight. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to my cousins up in Ohio, Jennifer and Joe Shortridge of 222 Paranormal. If you get a chance, check out their talk show. You can find them on Facebook under 222 Paranormal. Well, I hope everybody's doing good. I know things are kind of rough around the world, and especially here in the United States with this virus. But I know all the health workers and nurses and doctors and everybody that's and the EMTs and so forth is working so hard, to try and save lives. My hat's off to you all. Thank you all. And people like my daughter that works at Walmart. These people that's working at grocery stores to make sure that shelves are full and people still can get some supplies. Our hats off to y'all too. I mean, it's just so many people that are making such a huge difference in this pandemic, and I just, my heart goes out to everybody. We gotta stay safe and be careful. Okay, with that being said, tonight our special guest is once again. We tried this a couple weeks ago, and I had some technical problems, but once again, she's an author, researcher, and investigator of Wolfmen, Bigfoot, and other strange creatures, Linda Godfrey. And I'll go ahead and click her on over. Let's see here. Come on. There we go. Hello, Linda. I hope you can hear me.
I hear you perfectly. Am I coming in too?
Oh, yes. You sound great. You sound great. Thank you so much for coming back. And again, I apologize for the trouble from the last time.
No problem. Sometimes these things just, have a mind of their own. And it happens fairly often to me, to be honest. It's not the first time. I seem to have some sort of electromagnetic interference. I once stopped a complete radio tower.
Oh, wow.
Because I said I actually had a podcast of my own. It was called Uncanny Radio with a friend of mine, Steve Sullivan, who is an author. He got to start writing for the old Dungeons and Dragons magazine. If people remember those, the games that are the forerunners of almost all of the games now. And we had a guest on who had written an anthology of true but scary types of stories, and one of them was made in. I'm not going to say the name of it. It was given as a. It was made into a TV single series type of thing, more like a movie, and you were not supposed to say it. That was the whole legend of it. If you said it out loud, terrible things would happen. And we were broadcasting from an actual radio station every week in Burlington, Wisconsin. And we had this guest. We were talking to him. And I somehow just blurted out the word that should not be said. And at that moment, the entire radio tower just powered down. It just clicked off and powered down. And we were sitting there in semi-darkness, wondering what had happened.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So that I don't know which was creepier. The fact that there was a reaction like that, or the worrying about electricity interacting with you. They're both pretty creepy things. But yeah, I've had things like that happen to me all the time. There's a name for it. It's an initials. And I can't think of the exact thing, but and I don't think I'm a full-fledged person. There are people who can't walk past a washing machine while it's on without making the washing machine stop, or they can make street lights will go on and off. And I don't know. I think all strange phenomena are fair game for study. So even though it doesn't have anything necessarily to do with strange creatures, although that may not be entirely true either. I'm interested in all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I tell you, I know some people that that they can't wear a watch because they frown, or they walk by like a laptop or can't even have a cell phone because they burn them up.
Yes. Yeah, or work on a computer. Their computers are always messed up. That's one of mine too. I do get my computer messed up. But I'm also kind of clumsy, so it's one or the other.
Okay.
But
my problem is I don't understand it, especially if it's a cell phone with some new tech to it. I'm like, oh my God, I just learned the last one. Now try to figure this one out.
yeah, it's like it's like every 5 or 6 or 10 days they change a major page on something that you use all the time, and then you have to, unless you're a teenager and you were born with one in your hand, you don't know really how the thing works. I mean, at least me, none of my friends know. We just scooch the things around until something pops up, which can. It's particularly irritating if you're trying to take a picture of Bigfoot running through the woods, and all of a sudden you realize they just changed the page and you can't find it anymore. And whoops, another one where Bigfoot got away. So that can explain a lot too.
Yeah, it sure can. Well, can you explain a little bit to everyone, a little information about yourself, and what started you on the path to research and investigate so many different, creatures and legends and the paranormal and stuff? Because you research a wide variety of topics.
Well, I do, and it's not that I always thought that I would grow up and look for things people called werewolves or even Bigfoot. And I was aware of Bigfoot because I used to read my dad's Sports Afield magazines, where he had a lot of the early researchers' stories were in those. Ivan Sanderson and the truly great heroes of the beginning of cryptozoology. So I knew about those, and my dad was also kind of into UFOs, so we'd have a lot of science fiction magazines, and again some of those early UFO report stories. So I knew about that too. We also lived in a haunted house for probably 7 or 8 years, something like that. And it happened that I had a picture it was a portrait of a lady that was framed very ornately that I did for a 4-H project when I was maybe 13 or so, and it breathed at night. Now you're thinking, well, what's a young kid? I'm sure there was an explanation. Well, I could never find one, but I had this little room at the top of the stairs that we used to rotate around because I had 6 brothers and sisters, and we take turns being the one to have our own bedroom. And I hung this picture up that was just sort of a Civil War era lady, and I was awakened in the middle of the night by some heavy breathing that I'd never heard being made by anyone in a house before. It was just like this, it was like very labored. Mm-hmm. And I thought somebody must be in the house. I got up and I tiptoed and I listened around at everybody's door, and nobody was breathing like that. They all had, the littlest kids, you never heard a sound from them. My dad was snoring away. This was like a long labored thing. And so I went back to my bed and I was frightened. I decided I would say the Lord's Prayer because we were devout Lutherans, brought up that way. And I did, and it stopped. Mm. And that it stopped like for the night. It didn't keep waking me up or anything. So that would happen just about every night, where I would get the lights out, everybody would be asleep, and then it would wake me up, and I'd say the Lord's Prayer, and then it would stop. And I never told. The weird thing is, I didn't think much about it at the time, but I never told my parents about it or anybody because I just didn't think they would believe me, and I felt I'd sort of handled it. There was also a phenomenon where I would hear the footsteps, classic footsteps, coming up the stairs, and I used to I had a light short mattress because it was a small room. I got under my mattress and just slept under my mattress on those nights because that one didn't leave as easily. But here's the kicker for this. It could have been I would have just put it all up to some weird thought that I myself had. But when it was time for my younger sister, who was 4 years younger, so she would have been about 8 or 9 at that time, to have it, we were sitting at breakfast the next morning, and she slept in, and she came stumbling down the stairs, and she looked her hair was all crazy, and she looked like she hadn't slept at all, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she looked at me and she said, "You never told me the picture breathes."
Oh, wow.
And that's a true story.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and then the finale, I said, "Don't worry, just say the Lord's Prayer and it'll stop." So that's what she did, and it worked for her the same as for me.
Did you ever figure out what could have been up there?
There was never, no, I never found a rational thing, and I looked in heat ducts, because lots of times in old houses, the heating ducts and electricity are kind of weird. There was just nothing that was out of order, and no place that they could. We weren't close enough to any neighbor's house that I could have been hearing a neighbor or something like that. The dog, if we had a dog for a little while, but then we didn't have the dog, and the breathing, was the same. So nothing seemed to matter or provide an explanation for it. I do know that it was like 100-year-old house, though. At the time, and it's still standing, actually.
Well, did any other siblings, hear the breathing also?
Well, that's interesting. I'm trying to think if there were any other ones that slept in it, because we moved a year or so after that happened. Pity the poor fool who bought that house. I'm sure they had some sleepless nights too. But I think what happened was my parents were trying to, increase space because there were so many of us, and they tore out my sister put it in the attic was what happened. The one that had it after me, she put it in the attic, and then they did some demolition on the attic, and somehow that picture just disappeared. It wasn't around anymore. And I have a photograph of it, of me holding it. You can see my legs sticking out from below, and you can see the picture and the ornate frame and everything. And
wow.
My mother said she just took it somewhere to get rid of it. She used to trade with antique dealers and stuff, so that's probably what she did. So that it's just I could never figure it out, and that was kind of my first foray into investigating something, because I really did try a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you've written a lot of books, and especially about wolf men and the hunting of the American werewolf, real wolf men, and the Mexican dog man. And where you researched so many different topics. I guess right now I want to go into the wolf man, or wolf men, or dog men. What led you down the path to start researching that, and what has your research, found you in the type of experiences you've had with a wolf man or werewolf?
Yeah, like I said, I had never, out of everything, I had never ever expected to see something weird connected to a dog or a wolf. It wasn't in the public consciousness. If anybody said werewolf, people would think of something like Little Red Riding Hood, fairy tales, or go back to the creepy movies. There were lots of werewolf and monster movies made, when the first black and white films came out way back when, and you'd think of like Lon Chaney being just turning into this wolf bit by bit, and the muscles changing, or the Jack Nicholson. There have been different ones that have played the werewolf. And the other thought would be going back to Middle Ages, which is kind of what some of those early American werewolf movies were based on. But there was a difference, between the creatures that were encountered and oftentimes slaughtered or burned to death. If you were considered a werewolf, you were also considered a witch, and so there was an automatic association in those times with things that werewolves that ran or acted like men or wore clothing and ran around, whatever, and what is known as psychic phenomena. In those days, you were connected completely with the evil witch world, and I'm using witch in quotation marks because it's a completely different idea of what witches who called themselves that are today. So it just wasn't on my mind. And I was working at the time. My degree is in art education, and I was always busy, though, doing other things along with that. I was working. I had some teaching jobs at an art center besides a bunch of public schools, and I also was really into comic books, graphic novels, things like that, and just the daily cartoons, in the newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was working really hard. I was sending things to some of the news syndicates, hoping to get syndicated with something and be able to just do that. And I was coming very close. I was on a first name basis with one of the biggest syndicates director, and just kept missing it by this much. And so I finally went to our local county newspaper and volunteered to do editorial cartoons and other comic type cartoons for nothing, which is a pretty good deal for them. And they actually started paying me $8 a week, the princely sum. Now, anybody who gets into cryptozoology for a living kind of knows, unless they're very naive, that it's not a field where you're going to make a lot of money, because it's what they call a niche part of the publishing world, because not everybody is even thinking about such a thing, just as I hadn't been. And those of us who are in the profession, it seems like everybody in the world should know, but you'd be surprised how many people have no idea that such things are still being seen, or about Bray Road or anything else. So after I had been working there almost a year just doing those things for them, and one day their reporter quit, and the editor, I happened to be on the phone with the editor talking about next week's editorial cartoon, and he said, "Say, would you like to be a reporter? So and so just quit." And I thought a second, and I thought, well, it would have to pay more than $8 a week for one thing, and it sounds pretty interesting, because I'd always done well in writing and liked to write. And I said, sure. And one of the other editors told me later they were all watching him with their mouths dropping, because they didn't even know if I could type, really. But they were willing to give me a chance, and it was a wonderful place to work for the 10 to 11 years that I did work there. Just great people. I learned a lot. We had very good real editors. It wasn't, any kind of just a little paste up thing. So I felt lucky to have it. But I had only been there doing the editorial part for about a month when a woman tipped me off, and I started hearing it elsewhere, that people who lived around the area of a country road, maybe 3-4 miles long, called Bray Road, just outside of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, which was the county seat of Walworth County, were seeing what they described, for lack of a better word, as a werewolf. And I remember, I don't think I really laughed hard, but I kind of chuckled, and I'm like, what? I was as disbelieving as anybody, because you just don't hear about something like that every day. And so I started just kind of checking it out here and there with people I thought might know, and they would say, yeah, people are talking about that. I don't know what it is. And it happened that one of my first assignments was with our county animal control officer, investigating we had mutilated dogs showing up in garbage bags in different parts of the county, kind of buried. And we had puppy mills and a couple of other dog-related things. And I said, so it was a perfect intro for me to talk to him. I was a little nervous about bringing it up to him, frankly. And so I said, well, have you heard about what everybody's saying they're seeing out on Bray Road? And he looked at me, and he pulled open his desk drawer and pulled out a manila file folder, and it was labeled werewolf.
Oh.
So as I've often said, I'm sure my eyes just bugged out of my head, but as I've often said, when you've got a county official with an official file folder marked werewolves, that's news. No matter what it turns out to be, the fact that people are saying they're seeing this makes it news.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, it's not a werewolf. It's just definitely not a werewolf. But perhaps it's an injured animal that's been forced to walk and run on its hind legs, because that does happen in the wild. They don't usually live very long, though, because they can't properly hunt and do anything with their food. And so this was being seen as far back as at least 10 or 11 years from that time. So that seemed unlikely. Or it could have had rabies, or it could have been the animal control officer suggested that perhaps it was a coyote, which I knew was wrong right away, because they might average, a grown coyote will weigh about maybe 36 to 40 pounds, unless they're mating with a big dog or something, which happens, and you get coy dogs. But most of the time, coyotes aren't very big. And people were describing what they were seeing as 5.5 to 7 feet tall on its hind legs. But the county and control officer said, well, if you saw this jump up, maybe it was scared of the car. If somebody was driving along and it was scared of their car, and it leaped up in the air, and the headlights caught it just as it was in the air, and about to drop back down to the ground, maybe they'd think it was that tall. Now, you tell me if that makes any sense. I mean, I could not possibly imagine why a coyote would jump in the air like that and, hang and then fall to the ground. And if it was in your headlight, you saw it go up like that, you'd see it. You'd have a good. And besides, a lot of these were full daylight sightings.
Oh, wow.
So I started looking around and finding. I went through all of the people who had been calling in. What was in the file folder was the contact information and a brief statement from all these people who had been calling him and saying, I saw this thing. That also impressed me because, again, just common sense. If you're going to try and hoax somebody or play a joke or dress up as some kind of weird animal, you don't leave your contact number and everything they would need to get a hold of you to charge you with fraud or something. So that made it a little more believable to me. And then I went around and talked to people, and they all seemed sincere. They had seen it at all different times of the day and night. Some had seen it next to the road, holding like roadkill with their paws, but holding their paws almost like they were hands, which was weird. Running across the road, popping out of the cornfield. There were quite a few sightings, and there were more, too. I didn't even have them all in my first story, but I wrote the story and did kind of a quick sketch. I've often said, again, too, if I knew where that sketch would have landed, how far it would have gone and taken me, I would have tried to spend a little more time on me, because it was kind of a hurried thing, and they made it a big, the centerfold story of the newspaper. It was a pretty good sized tabloid that we had back then, and it was the weekend of 1991, 1992 into the new year, and it turned out to be the first newspaper that they ever had completely sell out the entire edition, every single copy of it. And here was the other thing that struck me is, and I was just deluged with phone calls and snail mail letters that people wrote to tell me they had seen it or their grandfather had seen it. It was not a joke, which was kind of overwhelming. But I was also getting calls from people right from the get-go, not just about this thing that looked like a wolf or a German shepherd that ran on its toe pads, on its hind leg toe pads only. And they were saying, well, there's also Bigfoot out in that area. And I saw a Bigfoot out there, or something that I now call a dire dog that I explained in my last book. Finally, it took me only 20 years to figure it out. Or that they had seen any number of other strange things. Goatman was another one that would come up. Weird, big thunderbird-like birds. So I knew that I was on to something that I found out had been tapped into by other writers, and it's kind of like all these things started showing up sometime back in the late 50s and 60s. UFOs is another big one. And different people started noticing and keeping track of them. But up until I started writing about this, really nobody had written a lot about bipedal dogs or wolfman like looking creatures. And this, I think, was probably one of the first times that they had what they call a flap of them. A flap is a term used in cryptozoology just to say a whole bunch of sightings. They're just a bunch. It doesn't mean that there's any certain number of them. But it was just a time when nobody had really had a large number of geographically close sightings of what sounded like the very same creature. That was pretty unusual. And I think that is a lot of what caught people's attention. It was just something sort of unheard of. And right away I got a call from a man in Michigan who was a disc jockey, and he said, "We have the same thing here in Michigan. It looks exactly like what you drew, and only we call it the Michigan Dog Man." And that, of course, has become, very well known at the time since then. And he thought he had just made it up. He was using some old lumberjack tales and just some stories he'd heard somewhere. There was actually a call in to one of the upper or northern parts of the Lower Peninsula of near this huge state forest that they have. And they were actually reported and showed up on 911 tapes. And then he made some up. And his goal was to make CDs to sell and get money for the animal shelter. So but in doing so, the same thing happened to him as me. People started calling and saying, "Hey, I saw this. It's no April Fool's joke." So that was pretty much where it started.
Oh, wow.
Whoops.
Well,
yes. It was a whirlwind.
Let's see, has there been any photographs or I guess any foot castings or any physical evidence of these creatures?
Well, yeah, the footprints are probably the best evidence so far for the dog man because it's just different from Bigfoot in many ways, but they have such large footprints, bigger than normal wolves really would have for some reason. And I think maybe it's a co-adaptation. Maybe somehow this was my first guess anyway. I don't claim to know what it is for sure by any means, but my idea that I called the indigenous dogman was that there were timber wolves, maybe that mated with prairie wolves or something and became a lot more agile and found out that they could stand up because a lot of them were found in the big prairie states. They seemed like the grasslands. And I thought, well, if you were trudging along in tall grass, you wouldn't know what was coming towards you. You couldn't see your prey. And it would be an advantage to be able to walk on your hind legs and hold things in, just under one of your, I hate to say forearms or something like that, 4 feet, so that you could just bite into it and not have to worry about things taking away from you if it's dragging your prey. If you're dragging your prey on the ground, somebody can come and take it away, or something is more likely. So that was my first idea. I drew that picture that was in the first book. And by the way, I did not make the first book until I'd worked at the newspaper for 10 years. And during that 10 years, people continued to send me their sightings and things that happened and questions, and I had quite a pile of them. And decided that I finally had better write a book. And so my first 2 books, the first was a true historic crime book called The Poison Widow, a true story of sin, strychnine, and murder that happened in the 1920s here in Wisconsin and had never been written about. And then the second one, I went back to the same publisher and he said, "What have you got for us?" now? And I said, well, would you believe werewolves? And as his eyebrows raised up till they met his hairline, at that, I can still see his face. But I explained that what I had in mind to write about was not just the very interesting physiology of the animals and how they moved and my theories about what they did, and best and most of all, the true witness encounters that people were telling me that happened to them and that they wanted so badly just to share with someone who wouldn't think they were foolish. And I sympathized because I remember the reason I never told my parents about the breathing picture or the footsteps on the stairway was I thought they would think I was crazy and laugh at me. When you've got, 4 brothers and they're just waiting to find something to laugh at you about, I just thought, no, I'm just not going to handle any of that. I'm just going to just keep it to myself until it happened to my sister and the word got out. But so I knew how it felt to really not want to tell people something that you knew was true. And so I thought, well, the book would be a good place to put that too. And then it'll all be done and nobody will have to wonder about it anymore and the whole thing's there. Well, that book came out and again, it just went gangbusters in terms of people and their interest. And again, they were getting hold of me. That led to, the next book, which was Hunting the American Werewolf. And 2 of my chapters were made into 2 of the episodes in the White Wolf production of Monster Quest, which, to me is still one of the best of the documentary Strange Animals series. So, and then it just kind of went on from there. So, just unexpectedly.
Well, when you was talking about, a little bit about Bigfoot, what have you found in your research about the Bigfoot, I guess, in your area or even across America?
Yeah, that's a great question because it was a great deal more than I expected. Because, like I said, I was aware of Bigfoot. I didn't know at the time anybody who had seen one. I knew that I was really interested because they sounded real. They sounded like they were real creatures. And, Ivan Sanderson was a noted scientist, and he had, he was very inclined toward thinking it was real. And then, of course, once I had started getting into all the looking for any kind of literature on things that people called werewolves, because there wasn't much written at that time, I started running into the Bigfoot literature and meeting people who had seen it and described it. And then also I was getting a fair number of letters from people who had seen it in the vicinity. And I know there was, and they were really amazing encounters. One, I had just given a lecture on one of my books to a crowd at a historical museum, and this woman came up to me and she said, well, I saw Bigfoot quite a few times when I was in high school. And I said, really? And she said, she lived on the edge of the Kettle Moraine State Forest, which is in southeastern Wisconsin. I'll just explain this real quickly. Kettles are what geologists called these deep-sided, they look like shaped like a kettle that you'd hang over a fire with straight sides, that were described all over this state park that was formed because the last glacier that came through, started putting on the brakes right there. And so when it stopped, the ice dug out these deep things, and that's where they came from. And then there were trails in between them, and it's called the Kettle Moraine State Forest. This woman just happened to be in one of the spots where there were tons of Bigfoot sightings. And she didn't know that other people were seeing them, but she lived on a farm that was right across the street from one of the rather tall hills that is in that area. And again, Bigfoot love elevation, so it was a really good place for some of them to have situated. And there was a big Christmas star that was lit up every year, and she said when that time came, they would put on their bundle up, take the lawn chair, sit out in the yard, and watched that Christmas star stuck in the snow because they could see Bigfoot, sometimes more than one, just kind of cavorting, almost dancing under that star. And she said every once in a while they'd stop and look like they were running at something, like they were trying to catch a rabbit or something. And she went to this very small high school, Eagle Palmyra. There were, not many students in each of the grades. It was like just a small country school. And she said her friends would come over and they would just do that together, sit and watch for the Bigfoot. They didn't know what to call it or what else. There was some people in that area. I met another woman who said they called it the Yeti, which would have been the Tibetan name for it, and it was something that the boys would scare the girls with when they were out parking, so that whatever, that's all. I think any high school you go to, that's the thing where the boys are trying to get the girls to go out and park somewhere at some scary place. So anyway, that was two within a couple of miles of each other. There were many others. Those are just two that always stick in my mind. And I found out there was a place where there was an animal farm. I'm not going to describe what type it is. It was right on the edge, a part of the Kettle Moraine, and the owner's wife was very well known in the area as a medical professional, and she said they would every once in a while when they would be rendering different types of the type of meat they were selling, they would have a kind of a pile out and back by the barn, and they'd kind of watch from a safe place, and eventually Bigfoot would come and take what they wanted from that pile and then walk back with it. And one time she said there was what looked like a female carrying an infant, and it set the infant down in the snow, found what she wanted, and I don't know if she actually saw it or not, but she was sure there had to have been an imprint of the baby Bigfoot's butt in the snow. So that's pretty interesting. And I've had in fields near the Kettle Moraine, because my husband and I, until 3 years ago, we lived in a house almost literally right in it. Our backyard was an acre. That one side and the back of it were you would drop off down into one of those kettles, a very large, huge one, and there were many acres, and it led up to one part of the lake that it was on. So it was very great Bigfoot habitat. And over the years that we lived there, I had a number of sightings and encounters, and neighbors that I knew did, and they just know how to stay out of sight. They're extremely good at that. I think there may be a little bit more than that to it as well, but I know that they sure do leave impressions of themselves and can do things that a human couldn't do, and leave prints that are very obviously no other print is like them. So, and it took me a long time to write about my own experiences, because again, I'm as cowardly as anybody. I just like with the ghost picture, I thought, well, this is even worse, because people are going to say, well, she writes books about that, so of course she's going to pretend that she had an experience. And believe me, it took 20 years until I had my first Bigfoot experience, from the time that I had my first reports of them until something happened with me. And a lot of people set out and want to see it, and they give up after nothing happening in 6 months or a year. And it can take a lot of time, and a lot of time spent putting yourself in places where they might be, which you have to be very careful about and cautious. It's not something to go running into the woods screaming, hoping they'll find you. There's a lot more to it. So that, I guess, is the difference. And I have been in places where the Dogman is seen too. There are many, even Milwaukee, parts of the city of Milwaukee have had their own places. The Dogmen seem to get around more on the edges of cities and in some of the towns than the Bigfoot. And part of that, the Dogmen have a big advantage over the Bigfoot in one way, in that although the Bigfoot have been seen kind of knuckle walking when they want to bend over and they're trying to keep a low profile, but if you had, let's just say for hypothetically, let's say you saw a dead Bigfoot, that all of a sudden you were walking and you saw this huge creature that had to have been 8 feet. It's lying on the ground, and it's got a very human-like face. And you look at it, it's covered with fur. It's got, feet like human feet. And you say, well, that's a dead Bigfoot. You would know for sure. If you saw, let's say, a dead indigenous dogman that could walk on its hind legs when it wanted to, but didn't always, because that's the thing about them. They can walk, they can drop down to all fours and run or walk just as easily either way. You might say, well, that's kind of a funny-looking big dog, or is that some kind of wolf? You wouldn't even question it, really. So the dogmen can drop down to all fours whenever they want to, and you're a little taken aback by its size usually, and oftentimes its behavior. So I need a sip of water after that.
That's
but
fine.
yeah,
That's fine. Take your time.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly if I answered your question.
Oh yeah. While you're taking a sip of water, what have you dealt with Native American legends? As far as Bigfoot or werewolves or Thunderbirds and so forth like that. Have you dealt with anything like that?
Sure. Oh yeah. I have Native American friends. I talk to them when I can, and I was even able to meet one time an elder, a woman elder of the Ho-Chunk people, who are thought to be probably the tribal people that have been around this particular part the longest. There were probably five other tribes throughout the years that they know of in the historical times. Who knows in the prehistorical what there was, but well, they have some idea, but that gets me off track. So I actually had sought some people out and talked to them about whether they thought that the Dogmen and the Bigfoot were completely physical creatures, or if there was some otherworldly aspect to them. And what almost all of them said, and this doesn't hold true for the whole country, I'm sure, but in this area, the different several different tribes, people from different tribes, said that they believed that the Dogman and the Bigfoot were on this earth before people, and that they've always had special business, and that there are certain limits they have that they can't just tear into us, en masse and finish our human race or anything like that. They have to adhere to certain rules. But when they're on this earth and they come here to do things like procreate, because they can't reproduce themselves anywhere other than you have to have a certain amount of gravity and the ability to form matter and things like that. They do here, and also who knows whatever else. There were several other ideas that they had too that made them come here to carry on. But otherwise, they were first and foremost spirit animals, and that they would come through the fresh springs. And Wisconsin is completely full of springs and lakes and rivers. It's a hugely watered state, and plus we border on Lake Michigan and Superior up to the north, and so it's a really water-fed place. Lots of those streams. So that was their idea for that. And then they had figured out ways that these different types of entities, because there are very ancient formations in all around southeastern Wisconsin. They do tread slightly over the state line over into Iowa, into Minnesota, and maybe Illinois, definitely. And they're called animal effigy mounds. These are raised beds, and they're huge. There are some that are as many as 150 feet across, and they are considered to be up to thousands of years old. And they were made by people that, when the settlers came here and asked who made these things, the tribal people that were here at the time said it was from before them. It was people before they were there. So they've been there a long time. And if you look at them, you have to appreciate them most like from a drone camera or the air, because you look down and you'll see a giant thunderhawk depiction which happens to lie across the UW campus in Madison. You'll see trains of bears. You'll see what they called the water panther, and the water panther was considered one of the most important of the animals because it would battle with the thunderbirds to keep the earth and air and sky balanced, so that you didn't get terrible big deluges of water. You got nice rain, and you didn't have droughts. You had nice, good sun, and so that they were often in there. But these animal effigy mounds sometimes were gathered into groups, and there were some that looked like wolves to me, and they were actually called water spirit mounds. They were a different type of water spirit. And there was a great book that came out about the time that showed maps of these effigy mounds. And I had been just kind of laboring on it, the idea of where they were myself. And when I'm doing that and trying to think, I have a regular map in front of me, not the GPS or the computer maps, which are fine, but I like to have a regular map. And I noticed that in this new book, they had shown where there were clusters of each type of these effigy mounds, and that I thought to myself, something looks familiar to me about the pattern of it. And I turned to the map I had just been drawing about where those particular effigy mounds were clustered, and you could lay, and I just realized immediately they were the same places. And so I had, for a long time when I was doing talks, and I wanted to show that I had the transparencies that you could just lay on the light projector and see it. And I would do that, and people would just gasp because it was so obvious. They were right where the other ones were. And I can't even tell you how amazing and special these effigy mounds are. You should look them up if you get a chance. Southern Wisconsin has, I think I read 96% of the ancient animal-shaped effigy mounds. So you'll find other ones. There's the big serpent mound in Ohio, and as I said, some that spread out onto the other states, but not many. Wisconsin has like 96%. They're what they call the man mound in Baraboo. I've got a few of these things in. By the way, if you don't mind my mentioning, all these things that I'm talking about are not just in the books, but they're in my free blog. I don't have ads or anything like that. Just lindagodfrey.com. No W's. Just lindagodfrey.com. And I've got a huge archive where you can read down and see what interests you. And you can also, if you want to see my earliest big encounter with a Bigfoot, there's a little box up on the upper right-hand side of the homepage of lindagodfrey.com, and you can type in Bigfoot branch, and it'll tell you the whole thing of my probably my scariest experience that I had with any of these cryptids.
Oh, wow. Well, what are the, as far as where you wrote about American monsters, what are the typical unknown creatures that is in America other than, the Bigfoot or a werewolf and the Thunderbird?
Well, it may be surprising, but, really these things are seen all over the world. I've had a number of sightings reported from Europe, especially places that were military installations, especially in World War II. There's a number of those that are listed in my new book, my new S book, which is I Know What I Saw, Modern Day Encounters with Monsters, New Urban Legends, and Ancient Lore. And so for this book, I was particularly looking for things around the world. And you'll notice in one, first of all, that almost any of these creatures, you go back in the most ancient civilizations, and you'll find things that look like half wolf, half man. Bird people are particularly popular. Catmen, all these sorts of different anthropomorphic, or human-like and animal-like. Some people call them therianthropes, together, and they go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so I knew right away that they were, and anybody really looking into these things can see it, that they're all over the world, and they go back as far as our earliest civilizations, and so you still find various types of them around the world, and they may vary a little bit from here to here, but so many places have these hairy man-like hominids that we call Bigfoot. It's called the Yeren in part of northern Russian area. It's called in Tibet. They have for some reason the Tibetan name is scary, but is escaping me. But Tibet has its own. They all have their own names and places. Even in the United States, they'll be describing something to me, and they'll have a different name for it. For instance, the Michigan Dog Man and the Beast of Bray Road, as I named the creature that people were seeing it. If you tried to describe them, they would be almost identical. And in other places down south, they'll have the same thing, and they'll call it the Lugaroo or the Rougarou or different variations, or the Beast of such things, or the Monster of what. People tend to name things after what they're familiar with. So they are all over. But another one that, to answer your direct question a little better, might be, you said Goat Man, but there are also just about any type of large, whatever's the largest of the creatures that are around there. But the cat or feline people, I think, was one that surprised me when I started getting, and this didn't happen right away, but I started maybe 10 years ago getting letters from people saying they saw this thing that was bipedal. It walked on its hind legs, and it appeared to have the body that was more like a canine, a head that was a combination canine and cat. Some people who called in were calling them Doberman lynxes because they said it had like the fur pattern of a lynx, but it had tall, very tall, pointy ears, not like the lynx. Lynxes have these kind of little pointy black twists on the top of their ears. And they'd say this is like if you took that and then added lots of muscles, and but it's still at the base it looked like a Doberman pinscher with a head that was like a cat. And I got reports of these from California and from Florida and other different places, which were quite surprising. And some people have linked them to the Black Panthers, which you wouldn't think would be anything that would be around Wisconsin. We do have mountain lions. They were eradicated almost in the 1920s, early 30s, and now they're coming back. That's happening all over the world. But the mountain lions are coming back, and they brought their pals, the Black Panthers, with them. There's a place in central Wisconsin called Hillsboro, Wisconsin, surrounded by very strange, there are lots and lots of the effigy mounds around them. There's a huge formation of quartzite. It's a ridge like 20 miles long next to where these things are. And what's being observed by the people who live there, and especially in one little maybe 18 to 20 square radius from this little town of Hillsboro, is that well over half, there's a newspaper person named Stephen Stanek. He was a former writer and editor of the local newspaper, and people started telling him several decades ago that they were seeing close-up daytime sightings of mountain lions and also what they called Black Panthers, because they were slightly bigger, most of them, and they were jet black. And I actually have a documentary film out that my son made. He's the filmmaker, actually, but we made a film interviewing these people and telling what they saw, and you can't not believe them. I mean, they're just 1,000%, and they have over 150. Stephen Stanek counted probably closer to 175, something like that, just in this small area, just within that time frame. That's astounding. And the really crazy part is that over half of them are black, and the black mountain lions are not supposed to exist. There are black jaguars and black leopards, and those two can mate, but it is said that the mountain lion cannot mate with black specimens of the leopards or the jaguars. But some people think that isn't true any longer because they don't know how there could be so many black ones around. And that just aren't supposed to be anywhere except South America. Maybe some of them down into the line by Mexico or somewhere else near there. But they're evidently heading eastward too. And the Native Americans have the same thoughts about there being the spirit animals, and that they're coming back here for a reason. In fact, there's a very, very well thought out and told example of that in the film that we made. The film is called, if you don't mind my saying, it's called Return to Wildcat Mountain. And there is a very old short mountain right there that is called, it's been called the Wildcat Mountain. Return to Wildcat Mountain, Wisconsin's Black Panther Nexus. But just return to Wildcat Mountain will get you to it. And you can also find pictures to click on and go to see a trailer, or where to, if you want to see it streaming, that kind of thing. That's also at that lindagodfrey.com. So I have to put that in while I'm thinking about it. Otherwise, if I leave that till the end, I forget it every single time. So that, I think, answers. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I said I'm the same way. I forget. I'm so forgetful about stuff. Go for it.
Yeah, and it does, answer your question about what other creatures are there besides the usual Dogman, Bigfoot, and the Thunderbird. There are these great cats that, especially the black jaguars, are not supposed to be up around here in Wisconsin, and they're not going. These are not like the black cats seen in the UK, where there have been black cat sightings and also black dog sightings. A lot of them in the UK, and smaller Bigfoot types of creatures that aren't quite as large as the ones that we see. But these things are all over. It's not just America. It's everywhere that people can get to and observe them on the earth. You're going to find one or two or more of them, of the types. So I hope I answered. Whoops, are you still there? Uh-oh. Hello?
Okay, can you hear me?
Hello? Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
I keep getting kicked out. I'm sorry.
Well,
I've been kicked out.
I cannot tell you.
While you were talking.
That happens a lot when I start talking about the big black cats. I'm not sure why, but it happens almost every time I talk about them on one of these radio shows.
Well, this reminds me of a guest I had on a couple of years ago, and he was talking about ancient civilizations and all these places he'd been, and it kept kicking me out then. I mean, it took 3 different shows to finally get a 2-hour show with him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now, did you determine, was that you, or was he one of the people who are sort of allergic to light emissions, or
no
sliders? That's the term, sliders.
He said that I guess a lot of research that he's done and a lot of writing he's done, that every talk show, even TV shows he's been on, they've always had some kind of technical difficulties, and he said he don't know why. But
yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello?
Are you there?
Oh, I was just going to. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Good. I thought we lost it again. But there is one thing that so many researchers, who, especially those who are out there, kind of measuring sometimes with Geiger counters or with tri-field meters. I have the tri-field meter I like to take out, or even just a plain old magnet of some kind will often do. You'll find that there seem to be just arrhythmia of electromagnetic pulses that are out there. If you're near anything like a big gathering of electrical components that are like the groundskeeper sheds or the big overhead lines. You'll very often get a lot of interference with your camera and with the things that you have. And a lot of people think that these strange creatures, because very often there are sightings near these electrical connector areas. And both Bigfoot and also the Dogman have been kind of associated with these things. On the other hand, where you've got these long electrical lines, and oftentimes there are special paths, below them for the groundskeepers, that's a lot easier to walk on than fighting your way through the bramble. And these creatures are seen by many witnesses to be very intelligent. And of course, if you're smart, you're not going to kill yourself walking through the bramblewood. You can lope along nicely through these areas that are kept where the electric lines are overhead. And they also just seem to be associated with strange things that happen. I know that was actually one of the purposes of the second most previous book, which was Monsters Among Us, where I was just kind of trying to show how these things are getting closer and closer to where we live, and sort of learning how to cope with our of communication and all the electric things we have. And what I did in this book was, it has still a lot of the examples of different types of creatures, and some things that you wouldn't even imagine in it. But what I tried to do was, wherever there was a pretty firm date when it happened, and I had a pretty good fix on the area or exactly where it was, I would go and look through all of the online tables that show if there were sunspots at that time, what phase the moon was in, and several other things like that. And it did turn out that some of these things showed repetitious patterns, and it's surprising. Everybody thinks, well, when the moon's out, when there's a full moon, that's when things are really happening with the paranormal and with these creatures. And just from my sample collection, and it's just a representative collection of them, it's not necessarily probably not what you might find with a bigger list to go through. But just from what I had there, it turned out that it appeared sunspots were much more effective in showing a connection between, say, UFOs and a Bigfoot sighting, and that it was more often a 3/4 moon than a full moon where you'd have kind of a burst in sightings. Those were just two of the things that that sort of thing needs to be studied more in depth and width by other researchers who, if they have the time, can and a good library of where to look for these things, although most of them are online now, that they can correlate these two. And my idea is that maybe our universe seems to be made up of patterns and kind of orderly, things that look orderly to us anyway, that we can depend on, so we aren't worried about things falling on us from the sky or whatever. Every day we can look and kind of know how the heavens work and move. Now I got so interested in talking about that I forgot sort of where I was going. But the thing is that we expect an orderly universe. That's what scientists have generally found. And so it's kind of nice to know that there does seem to be some sort of order, even if it's not exactly what we were expecting. And yeah, the moon's phase really didn't seem to have too much to do with it at all, which surprised me a bit.
What do you think, with all your research and with all the studies of these cryptics and stuff, do you think that these could be aliens or maybe some kind of alien hybrids? Especially where, I've talked to people where they've seen UFOs and Bigfoots, within, hours or days apart. Do you think there's a connection there?
Yeah, I don't know. There are different definitions for the ET. Some people think that they're actually coming from space somewhere. Some people think that they're almost totally housed on in another dimension, and they just come through their own portals to us, kind of like the Native Americans' ideas of the spirit Bigfoot and the spirit Dogman. Some people think they are housed underground on the earth itself, and so there are all these different ideas of them. And then, of course, there are certain types that show up quite a bit. There are some that look like what they call Nordics. They're tall, usually blonde, kind of bigger than man-size people, look basically like people. And then there are other ones that are referred to as, the Greys. They have these little childish bodies and large heads. So those are two of the types. And then there are ones that are called the Golems, kind of after this Lord of the Rings, the Gollum-looking creature that slunk around in the caves and had no fur on him left anymore. And so that's just three of them, but they are pretty generally what are observed all over the place. And our Army and Navy and Air Force are coming forward now with some admissions from some of the top people that have run our space programs, and other astronauts and people are coming forward with things that they've held quiet all these years. There does seem to be some substance to it, definitely, but as to whether they have some sort of connection with Bigfoot or with the upright dogmen, it's hard to tell. They do all sort of seem to come in clumps, as the friends say, they see one and then another one a few days later. Maybe that's more to because of their attraction to the electromagnetic fields of what is around there. And when the electromagnetic fields are fluctuating, some people think they may use those fields as sort of their own energy forces. And many have said that they think that there's many of Native American people that I've talked to think that there's some sort of correlation too between the seemingly physical creatures we see, and then things like that seem on the supernatural or paranormal side, and then things that look like pure energy, energy orbs for one thing. That's something that in tribal lore it's believed to be. They'll show up as maybe a basketball or baseball-sized orange globe or globular thing, and occasionally people will say they see them stop, and then it either kind of coalesces into the figure of a man or a creature like a Bigfoot gets out of it. And these things they're not as rare as you might think. I've actually seen two of them at extremely close range, way too close for comfort. The ones I saw were sort of a silvery grayish white, self-lit. They were both the size of a basketball, and both times I had someone else with me at the time. One of the times I had two men who are colleagues of mine that we do a lot of research together, and there had been strange things happening on the farm field of one of them, and we decided to do just a kind of a late night stakeout and just sit in a car and sit across the field from where these things would be. We didn't want to be too close, so we would be too obvious. But we were sitting there, and these guys are no slouches. One of them, Sanjay Signal, he's an architect from Chicago, has been doing this for a long time. The other's a retired math and physics teacher from the Chicago area. Lee Hampel, he's the owner of this farm. And we were, and I had been assisting him on various experiments we were doing, just to see things he was trying to capture things on trail cams, up to 4 or 5 at a time. And that's a whole other story too. Well, back to the energy thing, we were sitting there, and it was a really beautiful autumn night, and I myself was following airplanes that were coming along a flight path that always went along a certain way, and just kind of enjoying, the ambience of it. And I was just kind of zoning like that, because after you sit for a while in a car and you're just looking at things and looking for things, sometimes it's almost like a meditation, because your mind kind of lets go. When that happened, I looked at this one light, and it stopped. It had stopped. The other ones were still going. This one was stopped in position, and then it backed up, which airplanes never do while they're flying, unless they're in really big trouble. And I said, guys, I don't think that's an airplane. They were both sitting in the front seat. I was in the back because I like to make sure nothing's sneaking up behind us in that kind of situation. And we all looked. We all saw it. It had left the tree line, and when it was at the tree line, it was at the right proportion that we thought it was a plane line. But as it got closer, it was coming across this 40-acre field. As it got closer, we saw that it was actually smaller, and we were just kind of like, what is that? It's starting to panic a little bit because this thing is heading in, I mean, a beeline. It wasn't like wandering here, wandering there. It wasn't any kind of swamp gas that was getting blown around. It was a perfectly shaped globe, and it was coming directly for us in a straight beeline right across, very, very purposefully, as if it was like, what? Who are you? I've got to check you out. That's, just my own subjective. And I was getting my camera ready. It finally stopped. It stopped maybe 20 feet from the car, 20, 25 feet in the air, so it was right by us. We could see it perfectly. And it was we all estimated it was about the size of a basketball. It was this white with kind of a silvery blue tint to it, not much of it, just enough to make it a little bit off-white. And it just stopped in midair and was hanging there like it was looking at us, although it didn't have eyes or anything like that. And I was just getting my camera up to get a good picture of it, and Sanjay felt the impulse to grab this big mag light that they had up in the front seat, and he stuck it out the window and shined it at the thing. And we all felt that it had this emotion of great surprise, like it was shocked that we did that. And then it sort of just slightly vibrated, we called it jittering a little bit, and then it just sort of vanished into itself. Didn't pop or anything. It just sort of vanished into itself. And then we didn't know if it had actually left, if it had zipped down behind this bunch of brush that was nearby us, or actually popped out of existence. And so, and this is all happening, just kind of quickly. I mean, we weren't sitting for a long time or anything like that. We did not lose time. But while we were sitting there and I was getting my camera up, Sanjay he said, I have to see where it went. And he got out and went around behind this brush and came back in a minute, and he said, I'm really sick. We have to go right now. So somehow this thing imparted this feeling of illness, extreme illness, to him. And I know he's had that happen to him before. And there, we never knew where it went or what it was, but because he was driving, we had to leave right then. So we did, and that was the end of that. He has the owner, Lee Hampel, has seen other things out there, and I wrote this up in quite a bit of detail in Monsters Among Us, in case anyone's interested. That's the book before this one, and it tells all the different things that we saw. Some were quite remarkable. I don't think they're happening quite as fast and furious anymore, but and he was hampered in some ways by some laws that were changed, and he could not keep laying dead deer carcasses out. Well, that's redundant. Dead deer out in the field to observe what happened to them, which is kind of what we were doing, because they were getting taken places and things done to them that were just not usual. And he probably has thousands of photographs of this, but it tells all about that in the Monsters Among Us book. So so we've it's just a couple of the things. If you spend enough time in the places where these things are, having permission and not trespassing, and when I say enough time, I'm not talking 20 minutes. I'm talking the many years it can often take before it happens. And for some people, it happens right away. Other people like me, maybe I'm just stubborn. I don't know, but it's an undertaking, and I'm not sure that it's always safe. A lot of people who explore these things have become ill or had things happen to them, and I've had a lot of people tell me they've come to that conclusion that it may not be good for our health to do this, but we're humans. We're curious. We see these things, and they are where we live, and it's just human nature to want to look at what's around us for danger and make sure that things are safe and protect our families. And I think that's why everybody is curious about it. And there have been so many other people writing good books about it that there's much more information. I think the past 4 or 5 years, the TV series and other shows have just exploded on this topic. You never saw so much on strange animals. It was kind of like the poor relations of the fancy family. That people would look down on it. They don't do that anymore. It's gotten a lot more attention and respect than it used to.
Yeah, that's true, and I agree. Well, what about the research you've done as far as like lake and sea monsters? What can you tell us about your research in that?
Yeah, I actually wrote a book titled Lake and Sea Monsters. It's one of them. It was co-edited with Rosemary Guiley, who was a good friend of mine, and I'm so sad that she's departed us this last year. But I actually started looking into those when I did. I was asked to co-author the Weird Wisconsin book, and then I did Weird Michigan from Barnes and Noble. And they both really liked and wanted a lot of the lake and sea monsters. And I had a good opportunity to go look up a lot of them that just really I hadn't really realized were there. There were more than I had ever expected to find, too. But one of the best ones because it's very, very well documented historically, and it's not far from where I live. And this was in actually the sequel to Weird Wisconsin, which I called the sequel Strange Wisconsin. But in southern Wisconsin, there's a very well-known resort town called Lake Geneva. And Geneva Lake, which it's named for, is, of course, it's built right along the shores. And it was one of the last spots that the Potawatomi people lived in before they were made to leave back in the early 1800s. And so there were effigy mounds all over the place yet, and different evidences of things that were left by the Native Americans. And one of the things about that lake, I think it's the second deepest lake in Wisconsin, and that's saying something because we have a lot of lakes. Second deepest, and it also was supposed to be, according to tradition, the home of the water panther. And also that was where the Thunderbird would come every year to this deepest part of the lake, which was fed by the Crystal Springs, very strong spring system down there, just as it was supposed to be. And then they would battle to equalize all the elements of nature. And this was physically the main place where that was supposed to have happened in this whole Midwest region. So that was something pretty amazing. Well, back in the early 1900s, people started seeing this creature come out of the lake, and there were just steamboats and paddle boats were all that were around there. You didn't have electric, fishing motors or anything like that going on. So it was still a pretty calm and peaceful place, even though there were a lot of people who came up from Chicago and stayed in their mansions all around this lake. The lake is surrounded by mansions, by the way. It's real, and you can walk all around the whole thing. There's a footpath, so you can walk the whole thing and see the back of every one of the mansions. But they were starting to see what people were calling a sea monster, and it looked like the typical thing we would think of, with kind of a small but slightly horse-shaped snout on it and a bigger body, and it was estimated by different people to be as long as 60 feet long. One of them said it was as long as one of the steamers that were going up and down on the lake, and that would have been about 60 feet. But it would sometimes follow people. One time it was out there before many of the boats got out, and some young men thought, well, we'll just kind of row out to it and see what it does. And they did, and it rose its head up and started taking back after them and pretty much chased them back to shore. It was well believed because there was a a minister from one of the local churches who was just extremely well thought of. And there's lots of other lore connected with that too, because there's a ghost story about a priest and his sister. Actually, it was a priest, his sister, and their brother who was a doctor, a wife and a baby, who all went down on the exact point. They were going home on a steamboat ride, and all of a sudden the storm came up, and evidently it was unbalanced because it turned over the steamer, and all of these people were completely, all of them were lost to that lake in that same deepest spot of the lake. So you start putting all those things together. Plus, there were huge thunderbird and other types of animal effigies all around the lake, right up to the shore. Looked very different at the time when the settlers first came. And you can't help but think, how can all that not be related in some way, even if it's sort of a geomagnetic answer, that is creating a certain just electricity in the air that we don't feel, but that affects other things. I'm putting this very simply because I'm not a physicist, but you all kind of get the idea. This electromagnetic field that can be in certain places. Sometimes people connect it with quartz or with special types of rocks. There are different geographical elements that can cause it. But that one has always been, I think, my most favorite, because I was able to find a really old book that told about many of the tribes that were there and the people, what the people did, and about the mounds and that kind of thing. So it's always really rewarding when you find more than you expect to, and then you can start putting things together. It's like a puzzle that all fits if you get it all. I could go on with the water creatures, but again, it was just surprising to find that there were so many.
Well, in your opinion, because this is something, I research the paranormal, and there's a lot of things that I've seen throughout the years I've been researching that I think that with the Bigfoot, the werewolf, the UFOs, aliens, the ancient civilizations and megalithic sites, I feel like there is a huge connection to all of these. But putting the pieces together, I don't know how they go. But what's your opinion? Do you think that there's maybe some kind of connection with all of these cryptids and UFOs and so forth?
I think so. I would not be so boastful as to say I know exactly how, or I'm sure it is, but I do believe it. I do believe it, because it doesn't make sense that there'd be this big dull old rock hurtling around in space without some sort of life to it, purpose. I know there are some things like that maybe they only appear that way to us, but they look special to something else. But how can there not be connections between them? Some people think that there are different layers of other worlds that we kind of, and people have different ideas about them from some fairly recently from scientific work that's going on. It's for me, it makes a lot more sense to see the world and what is there, realizing that we don't see all of it with our physical eyes, but that doesn't mean it's not present and that it can't interact with us. For instance, I'll give this as the top most simple answer. If you think of a dog whistle, it's something that, we know there's such a thing as a dog whistle because we probably made it, but we can't hear it whistle. The dog can hear it whistle, but we can't, because there's a sliding scale of sound waves. There's very low ones and very high ones that are out of the range that our little puny ears can hear, but theirs can just, pick up at the drop of a dime. So, and every system that we know of that we can perceive on this planet, like light, there's always a gradient scale from the most to the least. We don't have just black and white. We have black, gray, and then all these different permutations till we get to the white. So I just have to think. I think that God is very consistent and very logical in the way that He's built this world and shaped it and put it together. And why would there be, the title of your radio show about the chaos? Why would God build a chaotic world outside of this one little place that has order and symmetry and beauty and can be predicted in mathematical formulas and have music and is inhabited by creatures that you can see God kind of used patterns and formed and shaped us to follow, to be different, but yet to be recognizable as part of that world. Why that just makes the most sense to me. And I think if you read the creation stories, not even just from the Christian Bible, but from other religions and places, it all sort of is that way. Even it may start out with chaos, but it ends up being all unchaotical. This is a terrible word. It ends up being layers of something that is orderly in a beautiful way, even if it looks bad sometimes. Even if there are these horrible big viruses that do terrible things to people, we don't understand them right now. There's still a place, they come from, I guess, they're related to other of these corona things. Oops, are we still here? I heard a
Yeah,
I heard.
I got a pop up. That's all right. We good.
Oh, okay.
My goodness.
Okay. So I don't know if I'm making sense here or not. Just I feel like I'm blathering on, but to me it just makes sense knowing everything we know about the world and everything that's been written in all the religious annals throughout civilization and time, and all the repeating of the half man, half beast, the divine beings that show up. It's all just too well laid out for it to be anything except we call it paranormal. Para just means beyond, just means beyond what we can perceive as normal. That's the meaning of that word. So does that kind of agree with what you were saying about, and again, taking your within the chaos, I think is your title, right?
Yeah, within the chaos.
Yeah,
I agree 100%, and I do. I think that there's a lot of things out there that I think we're on the cusp of maybe understanding a little more. But I think like people like you, me, and other researchers in different fields that are really doing the groundwork and looking at other things like you're talking about, maybe sunspots or anything dealing with the sun other than the moon, the difference with our climate, the Earth's axis, that could have something to do with other planets. I mean, it's just so much information that can lead us all to, I think, a reasonable answer one of these days. But I think there's so many people in each field that are trying to make a name for themselves. They're faking stuff that are, creating something that's not there or not real. I think we'll take a step forward and people like that knock us 5 steps back. And I think it's going to take a long time for, anything to come to light that the majority of people are going to be like, you know what? They're right.
Now, are you talking about people coming up with different species of things, or with? I'm really fascinated by what you're saying. I want to make sure I have it.
Well, yeah, as far as different species, as far as people accepting and knowing that there's evidence, physical evidence of Bigfoot or werewolf or some sea monster or lake creature or even the paranormal. There's some type of granted you got video and audio evidence, but some kind of tangible evidence that, people might can smell, touch, hear, that's more to open everybody's eyes up to, our world is so much more than what you really see.
Mhm.
I hope I did.
Oh, I think so.
I kind of
No,
got
I
on
think that's no, I think that's great. I like it when I'm not the only one talking. It's much more interesting. I know what I'm going to say, but it's much more interesting to me, even if I'm the guest, to hear what the host has to say. I enjoy having that interchange of the thoughts and ideas.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, there's a lot. Like I said, I've spoke to a lot of people, and some I agree with. Let's see, there's more I agree with than I disagree. There've been a few that I've kind of like, woo, that's way over my head.
Yeah, yep. I know what you mean there. But I'm sure, on the other hand, some of the very first things I even started saying, people were at that time saying, well, that's more than I can handle. It's it's human nature we want to be assured and have solid proof of things, don't we? I mean, it's the human way, and it's hard to describe if you haven't had any sort of encounter ever. But when I saw something break off a 35-foot limb of a very thriving, nice, clean, young oak tree with full of leaves, so that you couldn't see what was behind it. That was what I was talking about before, my first Bigfoot encounter. When it made two moves, and I was only 150 feet away. It was daylight, and the first thing it did was completely twist at the base of this branch, twisted it around, and then in its second movement, it just like the sound of a tree being hit by lightning in the winter, with this big crack, it pulled it right off the tree and threw it 40 feet down into this kettle right next to where I was standing. Wow. And when something like that happens, I knew what it was immediately. There was nothing else, no answer, no human, no just plain man could have done that. I went back later with a couple of friends, and we went down and measured the branch. It was 35 feet long, 8 inches in diameter, because I had to satisfy myself that there weren't any woodpecker markings on it, or like somebody had strangely decided to climb up that tree and saw off a branch or something when there wasn't anything around it. It was a big, it was a place that wasn't built up, so there was kettles right next to one another. And I knew what it was. You just know nothing that exists that we know of in our regular zoology could do something like that. And it's this feeling of complete awe, knowing that there are things I don't really understand, but yep, they're there, and that I had such a close encounter with it. And I hear that from other people. They say, I've thought ever since then, why me? Why did I see that? What is it? And there's just more than it's this humbling thought. They want to be assured that they're not crazy. That's the other big thing. But they also feel very humble that they were able to see and experience such a whatever it is, creature or whatever you want to call it. So have you heard that from? I would imagine you've heard that from a lot of people too.
Well, yeah, and I have that. And I have that question. As a matter of fact, I was just writing this down. When I was growing up, I seen apparitions. I seen UFOs. And when I was in my 20s, when I'd go hunting, I actually walked around a corner on a Bigfoot and a small one. And I've never been so terrified in my life. I mean,
did you see its face?
Yes. I mean, we were eye to eye. I'm like 6'4", and it was a little taller than me. But when I came around the corner, I guess it was coming down the hill as I was going up. We both stopped, and it had a little one beside of it, and I seen it pull it up close to it. and we just stand there. My heart was in my throat.
Oh wow!
It's like I couldn't breathe. And
I want to hear what its face looked like.
Well, its face was to me it looked more human. It had the wide nose. It had some hair on its face, but it was light. But the hair on it, all over its body, was a light brown. And the small one, I didn't get to see much of it because I was more focusing on the big one. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't tell whether it was male or female. But we stood there for such a long time, and then I'm like, I got to take a step back. So I got enough nerve to take one step back. And when I did, it took a step back. And I'm like, if I take one more step back, I'll be back around the corner where I can't see it and it can't see me. So I took it another step back. It took a step back. And I kind of took it breath. And then all of a sudden I seen it shoot down the hill. And run down the hill. So I know I know why hunters don't shoot them, because once you look in their eyes, and this one was blue-eyed. I'm blue-eyed.
Oh wow!
That's when I knew. I felt that connection, that human, some kind of human connection there. And
yeah, that's what most people. See, I haven't gotten to see a face. I've only I've saw I saw a different one. I think it was a different one because I forgot to mention my friend's daughter actually saw the one that cut that branch off of the tree. Otherwise, I still might not have been convinced. And it was like a silvery tan plus silver. It's the people around there call it a blonde Bigfoot. And she didn't even know if such a color existed. She was describing. She was just 20, interested, not in Bigfoot by any means, didn't know anything about it. But she saw it. My friend and I were turned the wrong way, and it had run behind some branches on the next kettle by the time, she screamed, and we turned around, and it was already in the blink of an eye, because they're very fast.
Oh yeah.
But the ones I actually saw were out in some fields at different times. Each time they were doing something different. It was kind of like they were trying to show me a different thing each time, but it was also they would only show themselves when the sun was right behind them, so that I couldn't see their faces, because they had kind of like a straightforward tuft around the face itself that's kind of shielded out the sun rays, and it cast a little shadow over their eyes and cheeks, so I could see their form, what I saw of their form very well, but not the faces. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. I think about that sometimes. What would I do if the next one actually is looking at me and I have to see the face?
Well, if you'll see, to me, you see past the hair, past the big nose and mouth and jaws, and you see the eyes. It's like you can see the humanity in the eyes. And to me, that was what was so amazing and so, I think, common to let me know I could take a step back. Because if not,
wow.
I'd still be standing there.
Wow, that's amazing. The ones I saw were where I saw the whole body actually were in these fields where there were lots of animals. There were there were cranes that nested there. There were deer, turkey, huge flocks of turkeys, lots of it to eat, and not too far from a lake. And it was a place where I walked just about every day. And the first one I saw was must have been like late summer, and it was like 2015, I think it was. And I'm going by this one area that my husband and I called it the animal field, because there were always animals coming out from. We always had to. It was a curve, and we had to slow down. And here and there, it was dotted with kettles, that the farmers just left because they couldn't really plow it or fill it in or anything. So I'm driving past this one, and I look, and I can see that it was a cornfield that had already been harvested. So there was pretty much nothing on the ground, just a few corn husks and things. And I could see this black stump coming up I don't know how far, maybe 50 feet off the road, something like that. It was a black stump, and it had sort of a weird-looking branch sticking up on one side of it. And I could see, I was thinking, well, that's the roots of the tree intersecting with the ground, because I could see where it was, hitting the ground. And I'm driving very slowly, and I got just past it, and I was thinking, well, why would the farmer leave a stump like that where he had to plow around the stump at least he could take out? And then it hit me. There was no stump there. I drove past that road every day just about for years and years and years, and I slammed on the brakes. I backed up, and it was gone. And I realized, and they're known to play statue, when you catch them out in the open. And I realized that the funny-looking branch was actually its arm that was kind of lifted up as if it had frozen in midair while it was, pushing one arm ahead. And the funny-looking roots were its feet, right on that, kind of buff field floor. And then the rest of it, and it was that kind of a dark charcoal color. And they all were that color. The second one I saw, I was in a different field, and I saw a fence post sticking up in the center of the field. At least I thought it was. And this time I was walking. I had nothing with me. I didn't have my phone or anything. I was just walking and saw that. And I was thinking the same sort of irritated thought, like what a dumb place to put a fence post. And I realized it was kind of fuzzy, and it had shoulders. And I glanced over at the actual fence post, which was gray and only about a third of the size of what I was looking at, which appeared to be a rounded head. And when I turned back to look, it slowly lowered itself completely down into the field. It just went straight down in, which was really weird. And I couldn't see any ears, or I have actually found a YouTube short film of a black bear out in a field like that, and looking straight ahead and going straight down like that. It was sort of the same kind of action, which a bear can do because they've got broad feet. They also walk kind of flat-footed like we do. So you have to be able to balance to do that. But there were no visible ears. It had no shoulders because bears don't have shoulders. It was completely different. And so I knew that I had not seen a bear. That kind of clinched it for me on that one. And I know why it was out in that field. It was right next to where the cranes kept their nest. I'm sure it was looking for eggs. And then the third one would have been like the following winter. And my husband was driving the car. We were going past the animal field. And this time, what I saw was what looked like a man in a black snowmobile suit standing on a branch in this group of trees that led down into a kettle pretty close to the road. I don't think it was even one football field away, but it was standing on a branch, and it was holding another branch and pumping it up and down like it was trying to break it off, which is something they're also known to do. And I could see it plainly because we'd had a snowfall, and the tree was completely covered with white frost, and then there was this black thing pumping up and down just like you'd pump in one of those old well pumps out in the farmyard. And we went past, and I was yelling, what the whatever is that? And my husband's like, I don't see it. And I'm like, stop the car. And he's, well, I got to get home and see the game. So we had to drive the rest of the way to our house. He got out, went in to see his game, and I was a little bit miffed. I won't say how much, but went back, and by then, of course, it was gone. And I did get permission from the owner of the field to go down there with a couple of guys and see if we could find prints. And down there, we did find we found where there was kind of a thatched hutch type of thing like they build right down in the center. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so those were and there have been other little things, but it got so I was having pebbles and clumps of dirt thrown at my office windows, which was right next, literally 12 feet from a kettle, a steep drop down into a kettle, where my office was. And yeah, and there's a lot more I could talk about, but those were the main sightings.
Well, I'll ask you one more question before because we're running out of time. Do you think that people like you, me, and other ones that have these sightings, whether it be UFO, cryptids, um, or the paranormal, do you think that they're chosen, maybe, or why is it that some people see these things and others don't?
I think because there are some people who would have had something in their life that makes them pay attention, and maybe that I would never say that I think I'm chosen, because I don't think it's that it's just me that's special or anything, but I think there were some circumstances. I think that when you live, a lot of people who observe, not everybody, but a lot are in areas where there are good habitats for these creatures, for Bigfoot or whatever. And I think that was the case of where I was living. Definitely was the case. But I think that they live in areas where their lives, they know it, depend on not being really seen by people, and they want to not interact, but they want to observe people because they are window peepers and they are door peepers, and they will stand in the back and watch your kids playing in the yard. They want to see what we're up to and what we're doing, and they don't let us see them unless they want us to see them. Well, there was a period of time in my life, it would have been about 13, 14 years ago, when I was having cancer treatment, and I had full surgery, so I was walking a little different, and I lost my hair, and was on very tough chemo for a while, and the radiation and the whole thing. And I was doing a lot of very positive, uplifting. I was singing Christian hymns and things like that. And our neighborhood, the houses were spread out, so I could walk around the woods and the road and stuff, and nobody could hear me. So I was singing all these songs, walking along. Now, how very often do you think they encountered somebody who walked all the roads and looked weird, cut her hair off, and sang, And so I think they probably thought, what is this strange person? Why are they doing this? And I think they became sort of interested in me and learned, my habits and where I would be and where I lived, and then just kind of made it their business to, I think they were spying on me more than I was spying on them. That's just my thought of maybe what it was.
Well,
because
awesome.
I waited all those years. Pardon?
I said that's awesome. I mean, that's a really great way of looking at it. That they were, interested in you, and I think that way with a lot of people's stories, that they're more interested in us than maybe so much that we are into them.
Right, and their lives depend on it. So it makes sense. They're not stupid by any means.
Nope, they sure ain't. Well, Linda, seeing how we're almost out of time, if you can go out after this virus hopefully gets through the United States and the world, do you have any plans for 2020? Anything, any projects or anything that you'd like to talk about? And how can people get a copy of your books and get in contact with you if they want any questions or anything else, such as a website or Facebook or so forth?
Sure. My books are all available. Some you can get in brick and mortar places like Barnes and Noble. They're all available online. You can go to lindagodfrey.com, and there's a books and bio and about page that has a list of books. And then there's also, if you go to the Return to Wildcat Mountain page, or just the page that says Home, that has a lot more information. It's all pretty much at lindagodfrey.com. Again, no W's, just Godfrey is how you spell Godfrey. And it's pretty much all there. Lots of things you can read, and there's even in the about section, there's a box where you can send me inquiries, or if you have a story you want to tell that you'd like me to share, or have questions about, that's right there too. So, and I do have a couple of fun things coming. If it doesn't get canceled, I'm going to be at the Bigfoot conference in Marriott, Menominee. It's right on the borderline, literally on the borderline of Wisconsin, Michigan. And that is the first weekend in June, and it's just called the Menominee Marinette Bigfoot Conference, right up there in the edge of the UP. I'm also planning to be. I've had like 4 or 5 things canceled, just that I already would have gone to. But another one that probably will still be held because it's in August, is up in northern Michigan in Sault Ste. Marie, and that's, if you just put Sault Ste. Marie Bigfoot Conference August 2020, you should find it pretty easily by that. That's a huge one at the casino there in Sault Ste. Marie. So that's easy to find too. And there are a couple other ones. I try to write. I'm not super great at updating my calendar, but I try to at least write something when something's coming up very soon. And there are a couple of other things. And again, we're very excited about the documentary. I don't know if we'll ever do another one. It's great when you can make a movie with your family and still like each other. My son will. My son who did like all of the videography and the audio and the animation and everything. He really did the actual making of the movie. He's still picking over. We keep making different types of it, but we do have the DVDs for sale now and the streaming. And again, you'll find that at lindagodfrey.com if you're curious. But we have a lot of that movie is based on chapters 10 and 11 in the book I Know What I Saw, and that's a whole nother story. So don't get me started. But people have been also connecting and seeing how different that is from the Tiger King stories that are so popular on the TV series right now. Completely different, but they both do involve tigers and lions and cats, big black cats. Just an interesting association. Whoops, are we off? Hello?
I'd like to apologize to Linda Godfrey. Last night, everything kind of crashed on me. The internet went down, so we didn't really get to finish, signing off. But I want to thank her so much for coming on the show. A great show. I want to have you back on as soon as I can, because just so much that you were talking about. I like to delve more into each topic. But again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Nothing but respect for you and the job that you've done. I like to reach out to everybody and tell them, thank everyone that's working so hard. The nurses and doctors, the EMTs, the police, the grocery stores, the truck drivers, the stockers, bag boys, girls, everyone that's keeping America still running the best we can. Thank you all. Thank you all for all the hard work you're doing. Keep it up. Keep your chin up. We'll get through this. It's going to take time, but we can do it together. And please, everybody, believe this shit. It's really happening. There are too many damn people dying because of being ignorant. And, I don't want to see nobody die. So please, everybody be careful and wear a mask and gloves and, do the 6 foot away from people and, just do what the CDC is telling us to do to try to keep us safe. But beyond that, everyone have a great weekend. Stay safe. And then our next show will be April 30th. And I don't have his name right now, but and I apologize for that. But we'll be talking about Bigfoot there too. It's been a whole week, a whole month of talking about cryptids. Love it. Again, everyone, be safe. Take care. Love you.
That's it for us tonight. I want to thank everyone that took the time to listen in. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Vibe Radio Network and to Ryan for putting up with us. Also to all the first responders and our men and women in the armed services. Thank you for your service and the sacrifices that you and your families make every day to keep our great nation safe. Tune in next week to another exciting show starting at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone can go to our Facebook page Within the Chaos, and don't forget to like our page to see upcoming guests along with past shows, postings, or you can also go to my website at www.blackdiamondps.org or blogtalkradio.com/Vibe Radio Network. Also, we have a YouTube channel, so go to YouTube, look up Within the Chaos for past shows. Thanks again. Until next week, everyone have a safe weekend and have a good night. And love you all. Be careful out there.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. I don't want to rule or conquer anyone. I should like to help everyone if possible. Jew, Gentile, black man, white. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. The aeroplane and the radio have brought us closer together. The very nature of these inventions cries out for the goodness in men, cries out for universal brotherhood, for the unity of us all. Even now, my voice is reaching millions throughout the world, millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved hate, the unloved and the unnatural. Soldiers, don't fight for slavery, fight for liberty. In the 17th chapter of St. Luke it is written, the kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you. You, the people, have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Then in the name of democracy, let us use that power. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. By the promise of these things, brutes have risen to power, but they lie. They do not fulfill that promise. They never will. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!